Hello there. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and I finally got through part 1 of Liber Magick Book 4. That was yoga. So now I'm going into part 2, magic, elemental theories. So to begin, chapter 1, the temple. So, since chapter 1, the temple, is very short, I want to start off by quoting some of Crowley's preliminary remarks to part 2 of Liber. There are several things he says that I think give a good description of what these next chapters will be about. So I'll just quote them, and let's get into it. So, quote, "There are methods of training the will by which it is easy to check one's progress. Every one knows the force of habit. Every one knows that if you keep on acting in a particular way, that action becomes easier, and at last absolutely natural. All religions have devised practices for this purpose. If you keep on praying with your lips long enough, you will one day find yourself praying in your heart." End quote. Next, still in preliminary remarks, quote, "We shall consider a simple form of magic, harmonized from many systems old and new, describing the various weapons of the magician and the furniture of his temple. We shall explain to what each really corresponds, and discuss the construction and the use of everything." End quote. And lastly, to quote from preliminary remarks, quote, "The magician works in a temple, the universe, which is conterminous with himself. In this temple a circle is drawn upon the floor for the limitation of his working. This circle is protected by divine names, the influences on which he relies to keep out hostile thoughts. Within the circle stands an altar, the solid basis on which he works, the foundation of all. Upon the altar are his wand, cup, sword, and pentacle, to represent his will, his understanding, his reason, and the lower parts of his being, respectively. On the altar, too, is a phial of oil, surrounded by a scourge, a dagger, and a chain, while above the altar hangs a lamp. The magician wears a crown, a single robe, and a lamen, and he bears a book of conjurations and a bell. The oil consecrates everything that it is touched with. It is his aspiration. All acts performed in accordance with that are holy. The scourge tortures him. The dagger wounds him. The chain binds him. It is by virtue of these three that his aspiration remains pure, and is able to consecrate all other things. He wears a crown to affirm his lordship, his divinity, a robe to symbolize silence, and a lamen to declare his work. The book of spells or conjurations is his magical record, his karma. In the east is the magic fire, in which all burns up at last." End quote. Now, finally, we may begin chapter 1, the temple. It opens with this sentence, quote, "The temple represents the external universe." End quote. When the magician constructs the temple, two things must first be taken into account. The first thing that must be taken into account when constructing the temple is this: what magical ceremonies or operations is this temple going to house? The dimensions and furnishings must reflect the rites therein performed. As a side note, the Hebrew letter Beth means house, and it corresponds with Mercury, the magician of the tarot. Mercury is the most fluid of the planets, and I just find it interesting as the temple can take on too many innumerable shapes, sizes, and components to list all of them, but I would like to give some examples in a few moments. Next, and even more important to consider when creating a temple, is that it is a microcosmic representation of the macrocosmic universe. As the human being is a microcosm of God, so too is the temple of the universe. These four things are absolutely synonymous: the magician, the highest God, the temple, and the universe. Know that as the human being has cells that make up larger organs internally, so too does the universe have stars that make up galaxies. Upon careful meditation, the likeness is uncanny. There is thus a very real connection between the magician and their temple. So, to give some examples. Sometimes the magician does not have the means, either circumstantially or financially, to build the exact temple that they desire, and so they must make do with what they have available to them. So be it. Living in NYC, I've met many magicians who live in studio apartments in Manhattan with barely any space. Thus, they may even have to perform such basic rituals as the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram by standing in place and turning, and doing all of their magic within this very confined space. Even when that is the case, it is enough. if space is an issue for you, take this advice if at all possible. Designate a specific space, no matter how small, and avoid doing any mundane activities there. If it is a 3 by 3 foot space, enough to turn in place and cast pentagrams, then make that your designated space for all magic until a bigger space for a full-size temple becomes available to you. I recommend this because when you do something repeatedly in a specific space day in and day out, when you go to that exact spot, your mind automatically shifts its consciousness to reflect what that space is used for. If it is a spot for magic, art, writing, or office work on a laptop, your mind will adjust to perform that task. That is why it is said to avoid doing your daily magical regimen where you sleep, as you will get sluggish and tired upon going there. And by doing magic, when trying to sleep, you may find you become awake and energized. Now, this does not apply to all cases, as sex magic can be performed in the bedroom, and also when you progress in magic far enough, nothing should really affect your mind whatsoever. But it is a general rule of thumb. If you have the means to dedicate a whole room of an apartment or house to magic, all the better. Consider what type of rituals you want to be doing there. Is this temple going to be used for a magical regimen such as Liber daily invocations, various forms of yoga, evocation by Solomonic magic, or something else? This should be taken into account, as it will reflect what furnishings you need therein. As a Thelemite, I always recommend for a personal temple wherein a person does their daily regimen or grade work of an order, if they are a Thelemite, a main altar with the stellia revealing placed towards Balskine. Depending on the type of magic, consider well if a central altar is necessary. If it is Solomonic magic, the circle and triangle should be in the center, and there should be a stand or altar for your journal and book of spells/conjurations, your oil, your incense, etc., as well as a stand for your magical sword. If the temple is for a magical initiatory order, then it needs such things that will be required for each initiation. Also, if there are multiple degrees, there must be space to store the props and materials that are for higher degree rites, so that lower degree members do not stumble upon items accidentally. An antechamber might also be necessary for people to wait while the magicians set up and perform preliminary rituals before the main ceremony. If the temple is for Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass, then it must have enough room for the high altar, small altars, and tomb for the priests in the west. Another consideration to make is the paint color of the walls and ceiling, as well as the shape of the room. If one is to go into very fine details, each element, planet, and zodiacal sign has colors that correspond with them according to the king, queen, prince, and princess scales from the magician's tables. Let's say your rituals to be performed in this temple are going to be exclusively solar. Walls that are painted gold would be an excellent touch, as would bright lights to emphasize the blazing light of the sun. In many of the Lemic temples, including my former one in Brooklyn, New York, if the practitioner is doing the Lemic grade work or initiations therein, you might consider painting the ceiling azure with 5 pointed stars with a red circle in the center of each star. I've seen these stars painted in gold, but in my personal temple, I chose to paint 31 of them in silver to remind me of the AA grade work I was doing at that time. Silver for the priestess of the Silver Star, but also so my mind was focused upon the SS, the Silver Star, the sovereign sanctuary of the Sanctum Sanctorum. This night sky ceiling is a representation of oneight and was inspired by temples of the ancient Egyptians who did something similar. Then, regarding the shape, I made a video explaining the symbolic meanings of the basic shapes, colors, and numbers of Hermetic philosophy on this YouTube channel. For definitions, see the video, which the link is in the description below. But in regards to a temple, I once spoke with my late teacher about constructing a series of temples in various shapes. In his youth, he told me he had rented a house with some sisters and brothers of a witchcraft coven, and used wood and sheetrock to change basic square rooms into various shapes, from a circle in one temple to an 8-pointed star in a mercurial temple. I would think the effects on the psyche would be very interesting. Imagine on the day you are being received as a practicus, a 3rd degree equals 8 square of AA, you read your grade papers and sign on them your motto in a temple that is shaped as an 8-pointed star. Then further, to do your grade work of third degree equals 8 square in that temple space shaped as an octagram or even an octagon. To me, it doesn't get much cooler than that. Having established the temple thus, all then that is required is to consecrate it. Again, in a previous video, I outlined all methods of consecrations of various things. You can find a link to that video in the description below as well. Just to abbreviate purification and consecration of a temple, salt water and incense burning in a thurible are blessed with holy words, and then are sprinkled and smoked around the space with words from Liber while making astral crosses at appropriate points. A final point on consecration I neglected to mention in my previous video on that subject. Aside from incense and holy oil, consecration occurs too by prolonged magical use of the thing in question. Some people choose to forego anointing and censing the item or space altogether and opt for simply using it. This is popular with tarot cards. The more they are used, the more you have poured your energy into them and have made them an extension of your being. I digress. The very final point about the temple I will say is that, at some point in my magical career, I began to look at the world as my temple and my life as the ritual. I'm not sure when this perspective came to me, but I think it is a fitting way to end this topic. If you are doing path work, then your life is dedicated to the great work. Every deed should be magic, causing change to occur in conformity with your will. All that you do in this sense is holy. Even with this outlook, maybe you do magic still in a private temple, in a forest or a cave high up on a mountain. Whatever the case may be, keep in mind, your body is the temple of the spirit. To become a god unto yourself, you must ready the pyramid for the god to dwell. Cleanliness is next to godliness, and it had better come first. If your internal world is a disaster, then there could be no room for divinity. Is a god to live in a dog? Clear away the gross trappings of earth, and burn away karma by invoking the light. Love is the law, love under will. I'll see you in the next one.